The metal gates of the Ohio State Penitentiary creaked open on October 15th, releasing a man who had entered 10 years ago under the name Beryl Bell into the gray autumn day. The guard indifferently handed him a plastic bag with his personal belongings, a worn wallet, a wedding ring he had never taken off, and keys to a house that no longer existed. Beryl stood in front of the gate, feeling the cold wind piercing his cheap suit, issued upon his release. 45 years, 10 of which he had spent behind bars for a crime he did not commit. His face, once open and good-natured, now bore the marks of prison life, harsh lines around his eyes, tight lips, the wary gaze of a man accustomed to constant danger. The bus to Cleveland was leaving in an hour. Beryl took a crumpled photograph out of his pocket, himself, Dora, and their 7-year-old daughter Emma on a picnic in Metro Park. The picture had been taken a month before his arrest, when their world still seemed stable and predictable. He worked as a builder for Midwest Construction. Dora sold clothes at the Tower City Shopping Center, and Emma was getting ready for first grade. They were an ordinary middle-class family in a large industrial city. Everything changed on one October night in 2014, when the police arrested him right at his workplace. Neighbors called emergency services after hearing screams coming from their home on Detroit Avenue. Dora met the police with a black eye and a torn blouse, sobbing and claiming that her husband had beaten her after another argument over money. "He's getting more and more aggressive," she testified in court, avoiding his gaze. "I was afraid for myself and for Emma. He threatened to kill us if I told anyone." Beryl remembered every word of that testimony. He remembered how his lawyer, Michael Reed, tried to build a defense based on the absence of previous incidents and on the testimony of colleagues who described him as a calm and reliable person. But the jury believed the woman's tears more than his desperate claims of innocence. The sentence, 10 years for aggravated domestic violence. Dora was granted full custody of Emma, and the house was sold to pay the legal costs. His life had fallen apart in 6 months of trial. On the bus rolling down Interstate 71 toward Cleveland, Beryl looked out the window at the passing landscape of northern Ohio, flat fields giving way to industrial areas, familiar factory silhouettes on the horizon. The city greeted him with a changed appearance, new office buildings in downtown, the reconstructed Lake Erie waterfront. But the core remained the same. Cleveland was still a working-class city, a place where people worked in manufacturing, raised children, and dreamed of a better future. Beryl rented a room in a cheap motel on the east side, in a neighborhood that had become even more crime-ridden during his imprisonment. The manager, a heavy-set man with nicotine-stained fingers, didn't even look up from the TV as he accepted a week's rent in cash. That same evening, 12 miles to the west, Dora Bell was finishing her shift at Nordstrom in the Legacy Village shopping center in the suburb of Lyndhurst. In 10 years, she had risen to the position of senior consultant in the women's clothing department, earning a reputation as a reliable employee and a good salary. Her apartment in a new residential complex was tastefully furnished, albeit modestly, but the peace she had built over the years was fragile. Every time the phone rang late at night, her heart skipped a beat. Every unfamiliar man who looked at her too intently in the store made her look over her shoulder. Emma, now a 17-year-old girl preparing to go to college, did not know the whole truth about what had happened to her father. "Dad was sick," Dora explained to her daughter. "He couldn't control his anger. The doctors at the prison are helping him get better." Dora had lived with this lie for 10 years, and sometimes she almost believed it herself. Almost. But at night, when sleep wouldn't come, she remembered the truth. She remembered how James Parker, a family friend, had shown up at their house that evening, drunk and aggressive. How he hit her when she refused to give him money for drugs. How he threatened to tell everyone about their brief affair a year ago if she didn't keep quiet. When the police arrived, James had already disappeared through the back door. Dora, in a panic and afraid, couldn't tell the truth. Beryl was due to come home from the night shift in an hour. It was easier to blame him, her husband, who couldn't defend himself, than to admit to her affair and her connection to a drug addict. Now Dora worked late into the evening, partly out of financial necessity, partly to avoid being alone with her thoughts. She knew about Beryl's early release. His lawyer had notified her in accordance with the Victims' Rights Act. October 23rd had been marked in red on her calendar for 3 months. Detective Sarah Thompson of the Cleveland Police Homicide Division studied photos from the crime scene on Collinwood Avenue. The body of 24-year-old Michelle Ramirez was found in her apartment by a neighbor who was concerned that the woman had not shown up for work for 2 days in a row. Signs of a struggle, evidence of sexual assault, no valuables missing. A classic crime, unfortunately typical for this neighborhood. Sarah looked through the list of suspects. An ex-boyfriend with a history of domestic violence, a drug dealer to whom Michelle owed money, a neighbor with a criminal record for sex crimes. At 38, she had investigated enough cases like this to know the statistics. In 70% of cases, the killer is known to the victim. Sarah had divorced 4 years ago when her husband couldn't cope with the demands of her job and her own obsession with justice. Now she was raising her 10-year-old son Tommy alone, trying to shield him from the reality she faced every day. Domestic violence cases were particularly difficult for her. Too often, the system failed women who asked for help. Her phone rang. The screen lit up with the name of a colleague from the juvenile division. "Thompson here. Sarah, it's Dan. We have a 17-year-old girl here asking about her father. She says he just got out of prison and she wants to find him. Her mother is against contact. Beryl Bell. Does that name ring a bell?" Sarah searched her memory. Bell. A case from 10 years ago. Domestic violence. Long sentence. "I remember something. What's the problem?" The girl claims her mother has been lying to her about her father all these years. She's asking for our help in finding him. Her mother is panicking, saying he's dangerous. Sarah looked at the photos of Michelle Ramirez spread out on her desk. In a big city, there were always too many victims, too little time for each case, too many families destroyed by violence and lies. "Pass the case on to social services," she said. "Let them deal with family dramas. We have a murder to solve." But something about this story caught her attention. Beryl Bell. She decided to look into his case tomorrow, in her free time. Detectives develop a nose for lies over years of work, and something told her that this family was hiding more than met the eye. Cleveland fell asleep to the sounds of sirens and city traffic. In a motel on the east side, Beryl Bell lay on a sagging bed, staring at the ceiling and planning his first steps into a world that had turned its back on him 10 years ago. In the suburbs, Dora Bell checked the locks on the doors and drew the curtains, hoping that distance and time would protect her from the consequences of an old lie. A week after his release, Beryl Bell sat in the crowded waiting room of the Cleveland Department of Social Services. He was surrounded by other newly released people, mothers with children seeking help, elderly people with documents to receive benefits. The smell of cheap disinfectant and despair filled the air. Number 247 on his ticket finally sounded through the crackling announcement system. A woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a stack of folders sat behind a worn desk. "Beryl Bell?" She looked through his file. "Released on October 23rd. How are you doing with housing? Staying in a motel for now? Looking for something permanent?" The social worker, who introduced herself as Gloria Henderson, shook her head. "It will be difficult with your criminal record. Most landlords check criminal history. Domestic violence is a red flag for them." Beryl clenched his fists, but restrained himself. 10 years in prison had taught him to control his emotions. "What about work?" "There's a program for ex-convicts. Warehouses, construction, cleaning. Starting pay is $10 an hour. Employers in the program are required to give people with criminal records a chance." She handed him a list of addresses. Beryl recognized some of the names, companies he had tried to get a job at right after school, when the world seemed full of possibilities. Now those same places represented his only chance of survival. At a construction site in the industrial district of Trement, manager Frank Olson studied Beryl's worn resume. The site looked familiar. The same cranes, concrete mixers, sounds of metal and power tools that had once been the soundtrack of his life. 10 years off is a long time, Olson said without looking up. Technology has changed. Safety requirements have gotten stricter. I'm willing to retrain. Work overtime. Olson finally looked at him. You understand that everyone here will know where you've been? A construction site is like a small town. Information spreads quickly. Beryl nodded. He had expected this. The stigma of a criminal was indelible. We'll give it a try. The trial period is 1 month. 8 o'clock on Monday morning. If you're late, don't bother coming back. The handshake was brief and formal. Beryl felt a mixture of relief and humiliation. He had once led a team of 8 people, and now he was grateful for the chance to carry bags of cement. In the same neighborhood, a 20-minute bus ride away, attorney Michael Reed was reviewing old files in his small office above a Chinese restaurant. The Beryl Bell case lay before him, a stack of documents that had haunted him for 10 years. Reed specialized in court-appointed defense, representing those who could not afford private counsel. In 20 years of practice, he had seen it all: the innocent sent to prison, the guilty who escaped punishment, a justice system that mostly worked but sometimes failed catastrophically. The Bell case was one such failure. Reed remembered every detail of that trial. Dora Bell in court, a frightened, traumatized woman with visible injuries. Her testimony was consistent, emotional, convincing. Beryl, a confused man who repeated the same thing over and over. I didn't touch her. I never laid a hand on her. There were no independent witnesses. Neighbors heard screams, but no one saw the incident itself. A medical examination confirmed the beatings, but could not determine who had inflicted them. It came down to one person's word against another's, and the court believed the victim. Reed tried to find clues pointing to another attacker. He questioned James Parker, a family friend who had been at the house earlier that evening. Parker was nervous and evasive, but his alibi was confirmed by 3 friends from the bar. They claimed to have been drinking with him all night starting at 8 p.m. Now, 10 years later, Reed realized he had missed something important. His intuition, honed by years of working with liars and victims, told him that there was more to the Bell case than met the eye. But at the time, he had 20 other cases, a limited investigation budget, and a client who refused to admit guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence. The call from Beryl came last week. Mr. Reed, this is Beryl Bell. I wanted to thank you for your help with my early release. How are things on the outside, Beryl? Tough, but I'll manage. Pause. Mr. Reed, I want to clear my name. Find a way to prove my innocence. Reed sighed. He had heard this from many clients. The desire for rehabilitation, the urge to prove one's innocence, even when the system had already delivered its final verdict. Beryl, the case is closed. The appeal period has expired. New evidence can only be presented in exceptional cases. What if I find a witness who lied in court, or someone who knows the truth? Reed looked at Beryl's photo in the file, a young man with an open face who believed in justice. 10 years in prison had changed this man, but it had not broken his spirit. If you have concrete evidence, we can talk. But don't get your hopes up. Dora Bell stood at the window of her apartment in Lyndhurst, watching the parking lot below. Every unfamiliar car, every man passing by the building made her heart beat faster. She had been living in a state of constant tension for 3 weeks now, ever since she received official notification of Beryl's release. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, but Dora could see that her daughter was also worried. Over the past few days, Emma had tried several times to talk about her father, but Dora had cut off the conversation. Mom, I'm 17. I have a right to know the truth, Emma said without looking up from her textbook. You know the truth. Your father was sick. He hurt me. But he got treatment in prison, didn't he? Maybe he's different now? Dora turned away from the window. Her daughter had grown into a beautiful young woman, tall, with Beryl's dark hair and his stubborn chin. Sometimes Dora saw so much of her father in her that it was painful. Emma, there are things you don't understand. I'm protecting both of us. What are you protecting me from? From a father I haven't seen for half my life? Dora sat down next to her daughter. How could she explain the complexity of what had happened to a 17-year-old girl? How could she tell her about her own cowardice, about the lie that had destroyed an innocent man? Your father may be angry with me for testifying against him in court. If he tries to contact you, it could be dangerous. Emma slammed her textbook shut. You know what, Mom? Sometimes I feel like you're hiding more from me than you're telling me. She went to her room, leaving Dora alone with her fears. Dora knew her daughter was right. Lies have a way of growing, taking up more and more space in your life until there's no room left for the truth. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Dora froze, staring at the screen. The 5th call in the last week. Each time she hadn't answered, and the caller hadn't left a message. It could have been telemarketing, but her intuition told her otherwise. At a motel on the east side, Beryl ended the call and placed the phone he had borrowed from his roommate on the bedspread. He hadn't left any messages for Dora. For now, he just wanted to know that the number was active, that she still lived in the same place. Finding her turned out to be easier than he expected. Social media, public records, phone directories. In the digital age, it was almost impossible to hide. He knew her address, her workplace, even Emma's school. Beryl didn't have any specific plans. For now, he was just gathering information, studying their new life. Dora worked at an expensive store in the suburbs, drove a used Honda, and lived in a decent neighborhood. Emma was an excellent student and planned to attend Ohio State University. They had built a good life on the ruins of his reputation. Beryl opened the notebook he had kept since his first day of freedom. Names, addresses, work schedules. James Parker worked at a car wash on Broadway. On Friday evenings, he usually drank at Murphy's Pub on Lorraine Avenue. He lived in his sister's basement and received disability benefits for a back injury. Parker was the key to the truth, but Beryl knew he had to approach him carefully. One wrong move, and he could be sent back to prison for violating his parole. He looked at the photo of Emma he had found on her social media, a 17-year-old daughter who didn't know her father. In her eyes, he saw the same determination that had once helped him survive in prison. Tomorrow, he would start work on a construction site. He would rebuild his life, slowly and carefully. But he would also seek the truth. And when he found it, everyone would pay for taking 10 years of his life away from him. Outside the motel window, Cleveland fell asleep to the roar of trains and the distant hum of the highway. In her apartment in Lyndhurst, Dora Bell checked the locks on the doors and prepared for another sleepless night. Miles of asphalt and 10 years of pain lay between them, but the distance was shrinking every day. Friday night at Murphy's Pub was typical for Cleveland's working-class neighborhood. Old Irish tunes blared from crackling speakers, the smell of fried food and beer filled the air, and men in work clothes washed away the week's fatigue with alcohol. Beryl Bell sat in the far corner watching the entrance for the second hour. James Parker showed up at 8:30, just as the bartender had predicted when Beryl gave him $20 for the information. Parker had changed over the past 10 years. His face was gaunt, his hair gray, and he had the heavy gait of a man in chronic pain. He ordered a whiskey and settled in at the bar like a regular. Beryl waited another hour, watching Parker methodically get drunk. 3 whiskeys, 2 beers, constant complaints to the bartender about back pain, his ex-wife, the government. When Parker ordered his 4th whiskey, Beryl approached the bar. Jim? Jim Parker? Parker turned, squinting through the alcoholic haze. It took a few seconds for recognition to break through the fog. Jesus, Beryl Bell. His voice trembled. When did you get out? 3 weeks ago. Beryl sat down on the stool next to him and ordered a beer. "How's it going, old friend?" Parker nervously drained his glass. His hands were shaking, either from alcohol or fear. "Listen, I didn't know. I didn't think." He tried to get up, but Beryl put his hand on his shoulder. "No rush. Let's talk about the old days." The bartender brought Beryl a beer and Parker another whiskey. A sad Irish song about lost love and betrayal played in the bar. "Do you remember that night, Jim? October 2014? When my life went downhill?" Parker gulped down his whiskey. "I don't remember anything. I was drunk. Yes, you were drunk. You came to our house and demanded money. Dora said you hit her." "She's lying." Parker spun around. It wasn't on purpose." Beryl felt the adrenaline rush through his veins. 10 years in prison had taught him to control his aggression, but now self-control was difficult. "So you did hit her?" Parker realized he had said too much. He ordered another whiskey, trying to buy some time. "Jim, I spent 10 years in prison for something I didn't do. I lost my daughter, my home, my job, my whole life. I think I deserve to hear the truth." The alcohol and the guilt that had been building up for 10 years did their job. Parker cried, the pathetic drunken tears of a man who had carried the burden of a secret for too long. "I didn't want to hit her. She refused to give me money for a fix. I was going through withdrawal, you understand? I needed help, and she said she wouldn't help me anymore." "Help? How long had you been begging her for money?" "We had a relationship for about a year. Nothing serious, just that you were working a lot and she was lonely." Beryl's world rocked. Betrayal. His wife had cheated on him with a drug addict and then used him as a scapegoat. "Go on." "That evening, I came for the money. I said that if she didn't give it to me, I would tell you about us. She got angry and started screaming. I hit her. Not hard, but she fell and hit her head on the table." Parker downed his whiskey in one gulp. "Then the cops arrived. The neighbors called them because of the screaming. I ran away through the backyard, and Dora told them it was you. And you kept quiet in court." "I had an alibi. My friends confirmed that I was at the bar from 8 in the evening." "A bought alibi." Parker nodded. "It cost me $500, all my savings." Beryl sat silently, digesting the information. 10 years in prison because of a drug addict's lie and his wife's betrayal. 10 years stolen from him and his daughter. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because living with this every day is like dying slowly. I thought you'd never get out. 10 years is a long time. People don't come out of prison the same." Parker looked at Beryl more closely. "You've changed. You've become tougher, scarier. Prison changes people, Jim, especially when you're serving time for someone else's crime." Beryl stood up and put $20 on the bar. "Thanks for your honesty." Better late than never. He headed for the exit, but Parker grabbed his sleeve. "What are you going to do?" Beryl slowly pulled his arm away. "I've been thinking about this for 3 weeks. Now I have all the details. Beryl, it was a long time ago. People have changed. Dora is a good mother, and Emma isn't to blame for what happened." "No, she's not. But she has a right to know the truth about her father." Beryl stepped out into the cold October evening. During their conversation, the temperature had dropped, and it had started to drizzle. He walked to the bus stop, planning every step of his revenge. In the apartment in Lyndhurst, Dora was finishing washing the dishes after dinner when Emma entered the kitchen with a tablet in her hands. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Her daughter's tone was serious, determined. Dora felt a familiar uneasiness. "About what?" "About Dad. I found him." The plate slipped from Dora's hands and shattered on the floor. "What do you mean?" "Social media, public posts. He works at a construction site in Tremont. He lives in a motel on the east side." Emma showed her the tablet screen. "Mom, I want to see him." Dora sank into a chair, feeling her legs buckle. Emma, you don't understand how dangerous this is. Dangerous? Mom, he's my father. I didn't know him for half my life because you said he was sick and undergoing treatment. But he's healthy now, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have released him. Dora saw in her daughter's eyes the same stubbornness that had once attracted her to Beryl. Emma had inherited his strength of will and integrity. Your father may be angry with me for my testimony in court. If he sees you, then what? He'll hurt me? She's his own daughter. People change in prison, Emma. Not always for the better. Emma stood up, putting away her tablet. You know what, Mom? Sometimes I think you're not afraid of what he'll do to me, but what I'll find out about you. The words hit home. Dora paled. What do you mean by that? Maybe the story isn't as simple as you told me. Maybe you're not such an innocent victim. Emma went to her room, leaving Dora alone with a broken plate and a crumbling lie. Dora understood that her 17-year-old daughter was growing up and starting to ask the right questions. Her phone rang, another unknown number. This time, Dora answered. Hello? Silence. Only the sound of breathing. Hello? Who is this? The line went dead. Dora knew who it was. She knew that the time for talking was coming to an end. Detective Sarah Thompson sat at her kitchen table at home, reviewing the Bell case by the light of a desk lamp. Her son Tommy was asleep in the next room, and rain drummed on the windows of their small house in West Park. The case was standard for domestic violence. The victim's testimony, medical evidence of beatings, no independent witnesses. Beryl Bell claimed he was innocent, but the jury didn't believe him. Something bothered Sarah about this case. She reread the testimony of James Parker, a family friend who had been in the house earlier that evening. His alibi was confirmed by 3 witnesses from Murphy's Pub. Sarah knew that bar. It was a place where, for $50, you could buy any testimony. A place where regulars covered for each other in exchange for drinks and silence. She called the police archives. This is Detective Thompson. I need the records for the Bell versus State of Ohio case, 2014. Yes, I know the case is closed. Just checking connections. Half an hour later, she got a call back. Detective, you asked about Bell? We have some interesting information. James Parker, a witness in the case, was arrested last week for drug dealing. He's currently in the county jail. Sarah wrote down the case number. Drug dealers in prison often became talkative, especially if they were facing a long sentence. What about Beryl Bell? Is he out? He was released 3 weeks ago. Good behavior, participation in rehabilitation programs. Sarah thanked her colleague and closed the folder. She had enough active cases to keep her busy without digging into old stories. But tomorrow, if she had time, she would visit Parker in prison, just out of curiosity. Beryl returned to the motel around midnight. The room smelled of mold and cheap air freshener. He lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Now he knew the whole truth. Dora had cheated on him with a drug addict. When Parker started making threats, she chose to sacrifice her husband to save her reputation. She lied in court, ruined his life, and took his daughter away from him. 10 years in prison for someone else's crime. 10 years while his daughter grew up thinking her father was a domestic tyrant. 10 years while Dora built a new life on the ruins of his reputation. Beryl took an old photo out of his bag. Him, Dora, and little Emma in the park. A happy family that existed before the lies and betrayal. He tore the photo in half. He put the half with Emma in his wallet. He threw the half with Dora in the trash can. Revenge requires planning. Beryl took out his notebook and began to make a plan. Dora's work schedule, her route home, the security system in her apartment complex. He had been studying her life for 3 weeks. Now he knew her better than she thought. But simply killing her would be too easy. She had to understand why this was happening. She had to remember the price an innocent man had paid for her lies. Beryl opened an old cell phone he had bought with cash at a pawn shop. He dialed a familiar number. Dora answered after the first ring. Hello? Hi, Dora. We need to talk. She was breathing heavily. "Beryl, please. Let's meet tomorrow, at the place where it all began. At our old house on Detroit Avenue. Midnight. I'm not coming. Then I'll tell Emma the whole truth. About your relationship with Parker. About how you lied in court. About the price you paid for your new life." Dora began to cry. "Beryl, please. Midnight, Dora. Don't be late." He hung up and threw the phone in the trash can. Tomorrow, he would find out if she was ready to face the consequences of her lies. Outside the motel window, Cleveland fell asleep to the sound of rain. Somewhere in the city, Dora Bell was packing her things, preparing for a meeting that would change everything. And in the next room, 17-year-old Emma was searching the internet for her father's address, planning her own meeting with the past. The truth, hidden for 10 years, was finally coming to the surface. And like all truths, it promised to be devastating. Saturday, November 15th, 11:47 p.m. Dora Bell parked her Honda in the underground garage of the Meadowbrook Heights apartment complex in Lyndhurst. The meeting with Beryl was scheduled for midnight at their old house, but she had no plans to go there. Instead, she spent the last 3 hours at the Legacy Village shopping center, surrounded by people and security cameras, hoping that a public place would protect her from confronting her past. But now, as she drove home, she realized she had only delayed the inevitable. Beryl knew where she lived. He knew her routine, her workplace, Emma's school. 10 years in prison had not weakened him. On the contrary, she could hear in his voice a cold determination that frightened her more than open rage. The elevator slowly climbed to the 7th floor. Dora fumbled in her purse for the pepper spray she had bought a week ago. The hallway was quiet. The neighbors were asleep, the lights of their televisions flickering in their apartments. A normal Saturday night in a quiet suburb. Dora opened the apartment door and turned on the light in the hallway. Everything was in its place. The paintings on the walls, the flowers in vases, the family photos without Beryl. The life she had built over 10 years, protected by lies and distance. "Hello, Dora." The voice came from the living room. Dora froze, the keys falling from her hands with a clatter. Beryl was sitting in her favorite chair, in the shadow between the windows. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, looking calm, almost relaxed. But there was something new in his eyes, something cold and merciless. "How did you get in?" "The balcony door. The lock isn't very secure." He stood up and Dora saw him fully. 10 years in prison had changed him. Broader shoulders, scars on his hands, new wrinkles around his eyes. "You didn't come to the meeting." "I couldn't." "I understand." It's hard to return to the scene of the crime. Dora slowly entered the living room, holding her purse in front of her. 6 steps to the door, 4 steps to the kitchen where the knives lay, 3 steps to the phone. "Beryl, I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry." He laughed, but there was no warmth in his laughter. "Dora, I spent 10 years in prison for something I didn't do. I lost my daughter, my job, my home, my reputation. Angry is too weak a word." He began to slowly approach her. "I met with Jim Parker tonight. We had an interesting conversation. He told me about your relationship, about how he demanded money for drugs, about how he hit you when you refused. Dora turned pale. "Beryl. And about how you decided to accuse me instead of him. Because it was easier. Because your husband couldn't defend himself, but your lover could run away. That's not how it was. I was scared, confused. You were a calculating bitch who sacrificed an innocent man for your own convenience." Dora backed away toward the kitchen. "I'm sorry. I regret what happened, but that was 10 years ago. 10 years. Beryl nodded. 10 years while you lived freely, raised my daughter, built your career. 10 years while I rotted in a cage because of your lies." Dora felt around on the countertop with her hand and found the knife handle. But Beryl was faster, his hand clamped down on her wrist with a strength honed by years of prison fights. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The struggle was short and one-sided. 10 years of office work was no match for 10 years of survival among murderers and rapists. Dora tried to scream, but his hand covered her mouth. She tried to scratch, but he easily controlled her movements. In the end, she just looked into his eyes, trying to find in them the remnants of the man she had once married. But there was only cold determination and 10 years of hatred. "This is for Emma," he said, squeezing his hands around her throat. "For the 10 years you stole from her. For the father she lost because of your lies." Dora tried to say something, but she couldn't breathe. The last thing she saw was the family portrait on the refrigerator, her and Emma last summer at Lake Erie, smiling and happy. Sunday, November 16th, 7:23 a.m. Mrs. Elsa Fisher, the downstairs neighbor, was coming up from her morning walk with her dog when she noticed the door to apartment 7B ajar. She knew Dora Bell as a quiet, neat woman who never left her door open. "Dora? Dora, are you all right?" Elsa looked inside and saw a body on the kitchen floor. Her scream woke up half the floor. Detective Sarah Thompson arrived at the scene at 8:45 a.m. The Meadowbrook Heights apartment complex was swarming with police cars, ambulances, and curious neighbors. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape, and technicians were already working inside the apartment. "What do we have?" Sarah asked Sergeant Davis, the first to arrive on the scene. Dora Bell, 43 years old, saleswoman at Nordstrom, found dead in her apartment around 7:30 a.m. A neighbor found the door open. Sarah entered the apartment, putting on protective shoe covers. The body was lying in the kitchen, next to the refrigerator. There were no signs of a robbery. The TV, laptop, and jewelry were untouched. The front door was locked from the inside, but the balcony door in the living room was ajar. "Preliminary cause of death?" Sarah asked the medical examiner. "Strangulation." "Manual." "There are signs of a struggle, but it was brief. The killer was significantly stronger than the victim." Sarah examined the kitchen. The knives in the holder were in place, no traces of blood. The struggle had been short and quiet. The neighbors hadn't heard anything. "Any family?" "A daughter, 17. She was staying with a friend. She's on her way." Sarah nodded. The worst part was telling children about the death of their parents, especially when the death was violent. "What about an ex-husband?" Sergeant Davis checked the records. "Beryl Bell. He was released from prison a month ago after serving time for domestic violence against the victim." Sarah felt a familiar premonition. The Bell case was the one she had been studying a few days ago. "Find him." Immediately, at that very moment, Beryl Bell was checking into the Hampton Inn in downtown Akron, 40 miles from Cleveland. He paid in cash, using fake documents he had bought from a cellmate before his release. The clerk, a student at a local university, barely looked up from his phone. "One night? 2, maybe 3. Depends on how the interview goes." Beryl got his key card and went up to his room on the 3rd floor. In the room, he took a shower, changed into clean clothes, and threw everything he had worn the night before into the garbage chute. At 9:30 a.m., he was in a cafe across the street from the hotel, ordering breakfast and reading the local newspaper. He had an alibi for the entire night, receipts from a gas station on the outskirts of Cleveland at 6 p.m., hotel check-in at 8:45 p.m., pizza delivery to his room at 10:30 p.m. It was the perfect timeline for someone who wanted to spend the weekend in another city. His phone rang at 10:15 a.m. "Mr. Bell? This is Detective Thompson from the Cleveland Police Department. I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About your ex-wife. She was found dead this morning." Beryl paused, feigning shock. "Dead? What happened?" "We're investigating." "Where are you now?" "In Akron. I came for the weekend to look for a job. Was it murder?" "We'd like to talk to you in person. Can you come to the station?" "Sure, but it'll take me a while to get there. I'll be there in 2 hours." Beryl hung up and finished his coffee. Everything was going according to plan. He was the prime suspect, but his alibi was irrefutable. Emma Bell sat in the interrogation room at the police station, her face red from crying. A social worker sat next to her, trying to comfort her. "Miss Bell, I know this is a difficult time," Detective Thompson said gently, "but I need to ask you a few questions. Who could have done this? Mom never hurt anyone. Did your mother receive any threats? Was anyone stalking her?" Emma shook her head. "She was scared after my father got out of prison. She checked the locks, looked over her shoulder on the street, but she didn't tell anyone about it." "Do you know where your father was last night?" "I don't know where he is at all. My mother forbade me to talk to him." Emma looked at the detective intently. "Do you think it was him?" Sarah didn't answer directly. "We're looking at all possibilities. I wanted to find him, to meet him. My mother was against it, but I thought I had a right to know my father." "Did your mother tell you why he was in prison?" "She said he was sick, that he had problems with aggression." Emma hesitated. "But recently I started to have doubts. My mother was very scared when she found out he had been released. Too scared for someone who was just defending herself from a sick husband." Sarah wrote down this observation. A smart girl who was beginning to see cracks in the official version of events. Beryl Bell arrived at the police station at 12:30 p.m. He was dressed in a decent suit bought especially for the occasion, remained calm, and cooperated with the investigation. "Mr. Bell, my condolences on your loss," Detective Thompson began. "Thank you. Despite everything that happened between us, Dora is the mother of my daughter. This is terrible. Tell me about your relationship after your release." "There was no relationship. I didn't contact her. I understood that my presence might frighten her." "But you knew where she lived?" Beryl nodded. "My lawyer gave me the information. By law, I had the right to know where my daughter lived." "When was the last time you saw your ex-wife?" "In court, 10 years ago." Detective Thompson showed him the phone records. "We have information about calls from an unknown number to Mrs. Bell's phone in recent weeks." "It wasn't me." "I have a phone. You can check the call history." Sarah knew that disposable phones could be bought with cash and thrown away, but it was difficult to prove. "Where were you last night between 8 p.m. and midnight?" Beryl took the receipts out of his pocket. "I left Cleveland around 6 p.m. I stopped at a gas station in Massillon. Here's the receipt for 6:45 p.m. I checked into the Hampton Inn in Akron at 8:45 p.m. I ordered pizza to my room at 10:30. Here's the receipt. In the morning, I had breakfast at a cafe across the street. Another receipt." The alibi was detailed and documented. Too detailed for a spontaneous decision, Sarah thought. "Why Akron?" "I'm looking for a job. There are several construction companies there that are willing to work with people with criminal records." The interview lasted an hour. Beryl answered all the questions calmly, provided details, and expressed his condolences. The perfect, grieving ex-husband with a rock-solid alibi. When he left, Sarah knew two things. He had killed his ex-wife, and it would be extremely difficult to prove. That evening, Sarah sat in her office, studying the case files. Photos of the crime scene, a timeline of events, and a list of potential suspects were already pinned to the board. Beryl Bell was an obvious candidate. Motive, opportunity, history of violence. But his alibi was virtually irrefutable. Either he was innocent, or he had planned the murder very carefully. Her phone rang. "Thompson. Detective, this is the duty officer at the county jail. You asked to be contacted when James Parker was ready to talk." Sarah remembered the drug dealer arrested last week, a witness in the Bell case 10 years ago. "I'll be there tomorrow morning." Perhaps the old Bell case held the keys to the new murder. In any case, she had time before the autopsy, which should confirm the preliminary conclusions about the cause of death. Outside the window, Cleveland was falling asleep, unaware that the killer was walking among them, protected by a carefully fabricated alibi and a decade-long thirst for revenge. Monday, November 17th, 9:30 a.m. The Cuyahoga County Jail greeted Detective Sarah Thompson with the familiar smell of disinfectant and human despair. James Parker sat in the visiting room, handcuffed to the table. 47 years of life had left their mark on him. The gaunt face of a drug addict, trembling hands, the nervous gaze of a man accustomed to lying. "Mr. Parker, I'm Detective Thompson. I want to talk to you about the Beryl Bell case." Parker looked up, and Sarah saw fear in his eyes. "What Bell case?" "That was 10 years ago. His ex-wife Dora was found dead yesterday morning." Murder Parker's hands trembled more violently. "And what does that have to do with me?" "Beryl Bell was released from prison a month ago. He served 10 years for domestic violence against Dora Bell. You were a witness in that case." Sarah placed the case file on the table. "Your testimony helped put him away. Now she's dead, and he's the prime suspect." Parker nervously licked his lips. "I told the truth in court. I had an alibi. An alibi corroborated by 3 drunks from Murphy's pub. Strange coincidence that they all remembered exactly the details you needed for your defense." "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah opened the folder and took out photos of Dora from the crime scene. Parker turned away. "Look at her, Jim. Look at what happened to the woman whose innocent husband you helped convict." "I didn't do anything. On Saturday night, Beryl Bell met you at Murphy's pub. You were drunk, and you told him something that changed everything. What exactly did you tell him?" Parker remained silent, staring at the floor. "Jim, you're charged with large-scale drug trafficking. That's 10 to 15 years in prison. But if you help me solve the murder, I'll talk to the prosecutor about a deal." Parker looked up. His eyes showed the torment of a man who had carried the burden of a secret for too long. "I didn't want it to go this far. It was just supposed to be a way to avoid trouble." "What trouble?" "I was already dealing drugs back then, 10 years ago. Dora bought pills from me, painkillers. First for her back, then just to live." Sarah wrote down every word. "Go on." "We had a relationship for a few months. Nothing serious, just loneliness. Beryl worked a lot. Dora was at home with the baby." "And what happened that night?" Parker took a deep breath. "I came for the money. Dora owed me for the pills. She said she couldn't pay, that Beryl had started to notice the money was missing. I got angry and threatened to tell him everything. About the drugs, about us." "And you hit her?" "Yes, once. She fell and hit the coffee table. I got scared and ran away. And then the police arrived. The neighbors called because of the screaming. When the cops arrived, I was already gone. And Dora said it was Beryl. Why didn't she tell the truth? Because then everything else would have come out. The drugs, the affair. She could have lost her baby, her job, her home. It was easier to blame her husband." Sarah felt her anger rising. "And you let an innocent man go to prison." "I had an alibi. I paid the guys at the bar to say I was with them all night. I thought the charges against Beryl wouldn't stick without evidence. But they did. The court believed the victim." Parker nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I found out about the sentence in the newspaper, 10 years. I didn't think he'd get that much. And you kept quiet all these years." "What could I do? Confess? It wouldn't have changed anything for Beryl, but it would have destroyed Dora and the baby." Sarah closed the folder. "And on Saturday, you told Beryl everything." "I was drunk. He asked about that night, and I just couldn't lie anymore. The guilt had been eating away at me for 10 years. "How did he react?" "Calmly. Too calmly. That scared me more than if he had attacked me." Sarah stood up. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Parker. Better late than never." Back at the station, Sarah found the autopsy results on her desk. Dora Bell died of suffocation between 11 p.m. and midnight on Saturday. Particles of skin were found under the victim's fingernails. DNA analysis is not yet complete, but they could be traces of a struggle. More interesting were the results of the apartment inspection. Signs of forced entry were found on the balcony door, The lock had been carefully picked with a professional tool. Footprints of size 42 shoes were found on the balcony floor, men's boots with characteristic Timberland soles. Sarah checked the information on Beryl Bell. Height, 183 centimeters, shoe size 42. But that was not yet direct evidence. Her phone rang. Detective Thompson? This is Technician Rodriguez from the lab. We have some interesting information on your Bell case. I'm listening. We analyzed the surveillance footage from the apartment complex. The cameras in the underground garage show that Mrs. Bell's car entered at 11:35 p.m. on Saturday. She got out of the car alone. We already know that. But there's more. The camera at the exit shows that at 12:47 a.m., a car left the garage without its headlights on. The license plate is not visible, but the model looks like a dark sedan. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. Can you determine the make? We're working on it, but there's one more detail. We checked the footage from cameras on nearby streets. At 10:15 p.m., a camera on Cedar Road recorded a dark 2008 Buick LeSabre sedan driving toward the complex. Sarah quickly flipped through the case file. Does Beryl Bell have a car? According to DMV records, no. But we checked car rentals. On Friday afternoon, a 2008 Buick LeSabre was rented from Budget Rent-A-Car on East 55th Street under the name Robert Barnes. Fake documents? Looks like it. The customer paid cash and left a cash deposit. The rental company's office cameras show a man about 45 years old, approximately 183 centimeters tall. Sarah could feel the case coming together. When was the car returned? Sunday morning around 6 a.m. Same man, fully fueled, washed inside and out. Send me all the camera footage and check the fingerprints in the rental car. Sarah hung up and looked at the case board. Beryl's alibi was starting to crumble. He could have rented a car under someone else's name, driven to Akron, checked into a hotel, created the appearance of staying there, and then returned to Cleveland to commit the murder. That same afternoon, Emma Bell was sitting in Michael Reed's law office. After her mother's death, she needed a guardian, and her only relative was her father, whom she hadn't seen in half her life. Miss Bell, your father wants to meet with you. But given the circumstances? Emma looked up. You mean the police suspect him of murdering my mother? Reed nodded. He hasn't been formally charged yet, but yes. Detective Thompson considers him the prime suspect. What do you think? You knew him before. Reed hesitated. As a lawyer, he couldn't breach client confidentiality, but as a human being, he saw the suffering of a 17-year-old girl who had lost her mother. Your father was convicted of domestic violence, but I always had my doubts about his guilt. What do you mean? There were a lot of uncertainties in that case. The only witness was your mother. The physical evidence was ambiguous. Emma leaned forward. Do you think he's innocent? I think the truth was more complicated than the court saw it. The office door opened. Beryl Bell entered, accompanied by a security guard. Formally, he was free, but the police monitored his every move. Emma saw her father for the first time in 10 years. He had changed, he had aged and become harder. But when he looked at her, she saw the same tenderness she remembered from her childhood. Emma. His voice trembled. You've grown so much. She didn't know what to say. This man was her father, but he was also the prime suspect in her mother's murder. Dad, is it true? What the police are saying? Beryl sat down opposite her. Emma, there are things you need to know. About what happened 10 years ago. About why I was in prison over the next hour. He told her everything. About Dora's connection to Parker. About the drugs. About the false accusations. About 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Emma listened, and with every minute that passed, her world collapsed and was rebuilt. Mom lied to me my whole life? She was protecting you. Trying to give you a normal life. Protecting me? She took my father away from me, She took 10 years away from you." Beryl took her hands in his. "Emma, I didn't kill your mother. But you met her on Saturday night." "Yes, I wanted to talk to her. I wanted her to tell you the truth, but she refused to meet me." Emma looked into her father's eyes, trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. She saw pain, anger, but not lies. "Then who killed her?" "I don't know. Maybe someone from her past. She had a lot of secrets." At 6 p.m., Detective Thompson received the DNA test results. The skin under Dora's fingernails did indeed belong to Beryl Bell. Together with the camera recordings and the rented car, this provided sufficient grounds for arrest. At 7:30 p.m., Beryl Bell was arrested at the motel where he had been living since his release. He did not resist or express surprise. He accepted the arrest as inevitable. "Beryl Bell, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Dora Bell. You have the right to remain silent." While his rights were being read, Beryl thought about Emma, about his 17-year-old daughter, who now knew the truth about her mother, but had lost her father too. Beryl Bell's trial began 6 months later. The prosecution presented compelling evidence: a motive for revenge, a rented car, CCTV footage, DNA under the victim's fingernails. The defense tried to prove that he had acted in the heat of the moment after learning of a decade-long deception. James Parker testified about the events of 10 years ago, confirming that Beryl was innocent in the first case. But this only strengthened the motive for murder. Emma Bell, now an adult and living with her aunt, testified in her father's favor. She told the court about her mother's lies, about the 10 years stolen from an innocent man. But even her tears could not justify the murder. The verdict was predictable: guilty of second-degree murder. Sentence: 25 years imprisonment. A year later, James Parker died in prison from an overdose. His last words were a request for forgiveness from the Bell family. Beryl Bell is serving his sentence in the same prison where he spent his first 10 years. He leads a quiet life, works in the library, and helps other inmates with legal issues. Sometimes he receives letters from Emma. Dora Bell is buried in Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. Her grave bears a simple inscription: "Beloved Mother." Emma comes there every year on the anniversary of her death, bringing flowers and forgiveness. The Bell family's story has become part of the statistics, yet another family destroyed by lies, revenge, and the inability to forgive. There are too many stories like this in the big city, and Detective Thompson knows that tomorrow there will be a new case, new victims, a new search for justice in a world where the truth too often comes too late.